Hello, thanks for joining.
Hello.
I think we may have almost all of us here. If people are feeling comfortable sharing their camera or being on camera, that would be awesome. Hi there. I think if folks are eating or drinking, I'm fine with it. I've been on Zoom for so long now. I think we got to do what we got to do. So I just put in the chat the rules of engagement in case anyone has any questions about that. Feel free to ask. Also, this is being recorded. I just want to make sure everyone knows that as well. And I'd love for us to do some quick introductions. Maybe if we could go around, introduce ourselves, pronouns, and the organization we're coming from and what type of work we're doing. Hi there. So I'll start us off. My name is Rebecca. I use she, her pronouns. I'm from Prevention Point. I've been working with them for about 2 years now. I started as a master's intern and then continued on working in the drop-in, and then was with the terrible aspects of COVID, I started working at home and started working somewhat as a consultant until I got back into the drop-in when we reopened. So I'm still working as a consultant, finishing up my time in the drop-in this summer as I work to finish up nursing school as well. So yeah, thank you all for joining. Anybody else want to go next?
I can go ahead. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Keegan Third-Silik. I am the prevention specialist with the Chester County Department of Drug and Alcohol Services. I'm also a member of our Chester County Overdose Prevention Task Force, and then also on the executive committee for the Regional Overdose Prevention Coalition. I do a lot of community outreach, technical assistance for our prevention providers within the county, public awareness, things like that. Excited to be here this afternoon. I don't drop-in centers, it's going to be new content for me. I'm here to do the technical assistance. So as people have any questions for that, and we kind of move through this session, I'll be of help for that. So excited to be here.
Awesome, welcome.
I can hop in next. My name is Susan Jones. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm from the Salvation Army's anti-trafficking program in Philadelphia. We provide anti-trafficking services, low barrier services to folks identifying as sex workers, are involved in any type of commercial sex, and are being exploited and or exploited. Additionally, I've started at the drop-in center at our, it's a drop-in center in Kensington, where a lot of folks are in commercial sex and sex work right on the Ave. Started as a volunteer in 2014 and have served in various capacities with this population. So drop-in centers definitely have my heart. While I don't do as much direct work there anymore, I definitely started there and really just love the environment that a drop-in center has. And so happy to be here with you all.
I'm also from Salvation Army's anti-trafficking program. I'm the director, and we have a variety of programs beyond our drop-in centers. We have housing, we have mobile case management, and we do a lot of work with police around like diversions and just like a handful of other programs that we do. So just also here to support, and but Sue's the expert on the drop-in center, so I will defer to her for most things.
I can go next. Hi, everybody. I'm Jen. I'm the secretary for Pennsylvania's Department of Drug and Alcohol Programs, which you were on earlier. You would already know that. And I chose to join this breakout session because I think this is an area where, as a state, we haven't focused much time and attention. So we have local drop-in centers in lots of places across the state. But there's not really any state-led initiatives. There's not any direct funding coming from the state to those centers. There might be some coming through the single county authority, but not from the state. So I'm just trying to learn a little bit more about what the needs are and how we as a state could be helpful.
I'll go next. Hi, I'm Dr. Gita Aquila. I oversee the HIV program at Family Service Association of Bucks County. And actually, in a previous life, I worked at an agency in New Jersey that did have a drop-in center. It was in Camden. And we actually, we worked with people there who were HIV positive, but also what we called high-risk negatives. And we were able to give out bleach kits, something we don't do here. And they also piloted, this was back in the day, a syringe services program, and that was in collaboration with AHEC. That was another agency in Camden. There was a mobile unit that would come by several times during the week and provide medical services to the participants at the drop-in center. We had showers, did laundry for people, obviously provided a range of case management services. So I would love to see something like that in our county. So that's why I joined, to see how do you get something like that started in a pretty big geographic area.
I can go next. Hi, my name is Jessica Zippin. I use she and her pronouns. I work for Maternity Care Coalition, and I supervise the Mom Mobile Rapid Engagement Program, which is for pregnant and parenting people with opioid use disorders or other substance use disorders. So we work with anybody in the perinatal period. And MCC as a whole is really focused on providing support to people in the perinatal period, usually through pretty structured home visiting. And our program is designed to be a little bit more intensive than some of the others, to be able to meet people where they're at if they are still actively using or early in their recovery and are not able to say keep a weekly appointment. So we work with folks like many of my clients I talk to every day over the phone just to check in, helping connect them to whatever resources will support their goals for themselves and their family. And it's pretty flexible. So we have some folks who are in long-term recovery, some folks who are actively using, people with custody of their kids, people who don't have custody of their kids. It's really across the board. So I joined, and we have a hotline. That's usually how people get engaged. So we can just kind of start working with them, meeting them where they're at right away. So not a drop-in center per se, but some similarities to that model. And I joined this breakout group because often we're working with people who are actively using and want to be in recovery, but maybe aren't quite ready. And I think the value that we provide sometimes is just being a relationship that is active, so that if they do decide that that's something that they're ready for, they know who to talk to, or if there's a lapse in their treatment, they can talk to us about okay, where could I get Suboxone if I don't have this prescription anymore? So I'm just interested in finding out more about what drop-in centers and other resources like that are available for quick engagement when people are ready for it. So they're not waiting, several days for things to be processed and then kind of losing that momentum.
Hello, I could go next. I'm Karen Chang. I'm the suicide prevention coordinator at the Coatesville VA. My pronouns are she, her, hers. So at the VA, I particularly focus on suicide prevention, which of course, I'm very concerned about overdoses and trying to prevent overdoses and have overall health for all of our veterans. I'm not just concerned about veterans, but the whole community. And I really want to learn about drop-in. I am your basic 101 student today. Thanks, everybody.
If anyone else wants to do an intro, feel free and go ahead, but otherwise, don't feel obligated. It's okay too. That's a very drop-in centric thing. No one's obligated to do anything.
I can introduce myself. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Caroline Draub. I am, my pronouns are she, her. I think I started my video. I switched things, so okay, good. My pronouns are she, her. I work at the Health Federation of Philadelphia. I'm the opioid response program assistant. Me and my coworker, we work together to provide trainings to providers in Philadelphia related to treating opioid use disorder. And we mainly target primary care services, but we're expanding to all different ones and also outside of just opioid use and all substance use. And I'm interested in this group because I'm relatively new to Philadelphia and I'd like to know about more of the resources.
So Rebecca, I can go if you want. I'm Ann Ricksecker. I'm the co-chair of the ROPC. And I'm affiliated with the Health Federation. You just heard Carolyn describe that. And I'm the board president at Prevention Point. And the reason I'm sitting here now, not only am I supposed to be floating around the breakouts to make sure that needs are met, but when we were designing this conference, this was the topic that I felt had some real energy behind the role of drop-in centers to bridge to other needs that people have. So I'm very curious to hear what people have to say about it. And I have nothing to offer as an expert, but I'm glad to be here.
And I'll just quickly say hi too. My name is Eliza Ziegler. I'm not sure. I'm showing up as Rebecca Hosey on the screen as well. Not sure why, but I am currently a project manager with the Office of Children and Families, and I provide data support to DHS, our Child Protective Services agency, around areas of reducing our footprint and racial disparities. But in my past life, I was actually classmates with Rebecca when we got our MPHs, and I worked on a project focused on HIV prevention, where we partnered with Ladies Night at Prevention Point, which is the women's drop-in center that's held on in the evenings once a week. So harm reduction and improving services for people who use drugs is like a area that is important to me, both professionally and personally. And I'm just happy to be here and continue my learning.
I'll introduce myself really quick. My name is Allie D'Angelo. I'm an intern at Prevention Point. I'm joining you guys here today just to take some notes and just listen to what you guys have to say about drop-ins, hopefully learn some more. I was able to volunteer a couple days in the drop-in in the couple weeks I've been interning at Prevention Point, and that's been a great experience, and I hope to learn some more from you guys.
Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for giving so much introduction. I feel like Susan, you should be here giving us all of your information because you've been doing this for the longest. Or perhaps Dr. Kroll, because you had that in Camden. So everybody kind of gave their relation to drop-ins, but everybody has a different idea of what that is. And I heard Jessica mention having a model for a drop-in, which I wrote down because I think there really is no model and there really is no requirement to a drop-in besides kind of existing, which provides such a low barrier service. So for the folks that already have drop-ins or have experience with drop-ins, could you maybe talk a little bit about how that was created and any barriers that existed in creating that? And then if anybody who doesn't have a drop-in but is interested in starting one, could you talk about what would be needed to get, or what you think would be needed to get going?
So can I go?
Absolutely, please.
So here, this is really why I joined this group. So our agency actually runs the only emergency shelter in the county. And we know that there are woods that surround this shelter. And we know that there are people who hang out in the woods. And we also know that there are other agencies that, do provide some services to these people. But when I think back to the experience that when I worked in Jersey, they don't have, these individuals, to my knowledge, don't really have that drop-in center experience. They don't have a place where they could go during the day to, wash their clothes, take a shower, get a meal, talk to somebody, to access case management services, get an HIV test quickly, on demand, get a Hep C test, just, things that a drop-in center could offer, free condoms, that kind of stuff. How many of these woods are throughout the county and where people are congregating? That's that's another thing that crosses my mind. So where do you place a drop-in center? B, where do you get the money to start something like this? I had thought, well, could you do a trial, like we're going to do a pop-up center today. We're going to set up a big tent and see if anybody shows up. We're going to have sandwiches. We're going to have X, Y, and Z available, and, send somebody into the woods with, a service organization that we know about, hand out flyers. We're going to be here on X, Y, and Z day. Feel free to come on by and see if anybody shows. Is that how you start? I don't know. When I was in Jersey, the drop-in center already existed when I came there. So I can't tell you how it started. But obviously it was in a city. It was in a populated area. So the people were already there. This is different. This is like we're starting in not knowing how many are there, but sensing that there's got to be a need.
I think to me that so many things that you said are great starting off points. And also, if anybody would like to take themselves off mic, feel free to do so, and you can just chime in. Also, if you have dogs like I do, don't worry about it. Whatever's comfortable. But Dr. Kroll, I think some of the things you mentioned that stuck out to me are people there and how many. We know they're there, but we don't know how many. So some thoughts I have on that is if possible, doing that outreach to see really how many folks are around and what services might be necessary. I think a lot of things our organizations have in common. I know Susan and Heather do very similar things of client-led, participant-led needs and services. So seeing who's there is the first thing I think of, and seeing what they might need. Like, do they want food? Do they want a charging station for their phones? Do they want to wash up? Do they need help with laundry? And then going from there, or perhaps even some things I know we experience are we don't have laundry services right now, but we have clothes. So we recycle clothes like no other. And so if that's the need in a pop-up situation versus laundry, filling those needs where they are. But then from there, I mean, I know pop-ups are awesome, and I love that idea. Does anyone have any thoughts? Or, oh, I see Caroline wrote in here. Caroline, if you want to chat, you're welcome to. If not, that's okay.
Sure. I've missed your introduction, Gita, so I'm sorry. I don't know where you're located, but
I'm right in Kensington as well. I'm Prevention Point.
Okay. I just was wondering if you can maybe, if you're talking about like outreaching, I wonder if you could find what people need, like what you're seeing the most in your local emergency departments.
Absolutely. Yeah, Susan, go ahead.
Yeah. I think what's really powerful in general is that every county has different ways that they're approaching various issues and looking at the intersection of substance use, oftentimes housing insecurities and poverty, and seeing where a lot of the time outreach workers know these places, these hotspots, if your county has them. I think that it's really important to distinguish the difference between working in a rural county, a county that's in the city. I think when we look at the issue of trafficking looks so different in counties in, you know, the middle of PA than it does in Philly. And so does homelessness, and so does substance use, right? Like it looks different. The way that people survive looks different. And so I think for the start of Salvation Army, it looked at some immediate issues because there were a series of murders that were happening in Kensington towards the population of commercially sexually exploited individuals. In this case, what was happening is there was, this is my understanding, and honestly, I've always wanted to look more into the case, but it was around the time of the Kensington Strangler. I believe it was like at the end of 2009, maybe 2008, until like 2010. I'm sure someone can fact check me here. But I think that there were a lot of local Kensington communities that, and, you know, NGOs and churches and, you know, just like agencies that came together and were like, there have been like multiple killings of folks, female identifying, and like they were cis white females in their mid 30s and they were being murdered. And on one level, it was like during the time when opioid use was really starting to increase in this neighborhood. And so for us, it was like an apparent need, an apparent neighborhood, an apparent like a block where, you know, folks would do dates right on the corners, you know, so it was like obvious that that's where this issue was being centralized. And like full transparency, like predominantly white neighborhood historically, right? And so funding was more accessible to our predominantly white, like country that we live in and where funding goes. And so I do want to acknowledge the privileges and the reality that like there are other neighborhoods in Philly that experience commercial sexual exploitation, that sex workers are surviving, that trans youth are located, that other agencies are looking at drop-in centers in those areas too. So I think that like when we talk about where to look for funding, there's places that are easily funded and have needs, and there's places that have needs and are not easily funded. And so that's just like something to bring into the conversation too. So with that being said, it started for us as volunteer-led. It was really grassroots. A bunch of different agencies came together. There was a community center, like it was just like, it really came together well. But one community center, right, the Bevilacqua Center, the Cardinal Bevilacqua Center, opened up their doors and said, yeah, like have a, we called at the time, you know, ladies night or women's center. It's our name is known in the community as the Women's Center, right? Like we're a drop-in center. We try to be as like low barrier as far as, you know, really like non-cis men. We try to be as open to people's gender identities, but it's not for cis men, cis males. But at the time, you know, it was just folks who were on the Ave in commercial sex work, trafficking, and they would come in, there would be food. We really followed Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And additionally, like our foundations were always about safety, being trauma informed, and consistency. I think that was something as well. That was really important to us to be consistent no matter what we were doing. And so I think that even Dr. Kroll, to your point about the tents and setting it up, I think what we, at least in our experience, is like if something is going to be established, if you're just doing the research and collecting that data, great, like go for it. And people grow to really depend on it. And if anything, the pandemic has shared us that like having consistent hours, having consistent days really means a lot to the community.
I agree with all of that. I think consistency is something Prevention Point instills with, and I'm sure you all do as well, when you have a volunteer come, or similar to like Allie, who's here as an intern, consistency is one of the first things we learn when we become part of the Prevention Point community, because it just is so important. And then that's a huge challenge in and of itself. So something that you mentioned, Susan and Dr. Kroll, how do we staff or put people in this place to serve others? I'd love to explore that a little bit more. If folks have experiences with that, I can also share on that, or just throw out some ideas. We can kind of brainstorm.
Well, I think, you know, Susan had already alluded to the importance of collaboration and using networks that you already have. You know, if you shouldn't duplicate, if you already know that somebody is doing something, then bring them in and have them do it, because otherwise you're just, you know, it's a waste of time, and it's a waste of your resource, you know. I think sometimes it can be hard to try to bring people together because of time, and everybody, I think, can be so overwhelmed with everything that they're trying to do. So that can be challenging to try to carve out, you know, when can we get together, or how do we even come to the table? If it's somebody that you've heard of them, they may not know you. So there can be a lot of work in that initial meet and greet. But I think once the partnerships are formed, and you have to be persistent, because sometimes things may not always work out the first go around, or two or three. So, but I think really trying to maximize relationships.
That makes me think of Eliza mentioned ladies' night, which we now call safe space at Prevention Point. I think thinking of that's kind of to me, that's a model of there we go with model of drop-in that is really sort of functional, because the one thing that stays the same every week is that it's Wednesday night. It used to be Tuesday night, but that was pre-COVID, but that's the only thing that really stays the same, and that cis men are not allowed, which can be a little risky because they're allowed every other time at Prevention Point. So that's another thing to navigate. But just talking about the model, it's consistent in that it's every Wednesday. We close a little bit early and then we reopen for safe space. Different folks are there working or volunteering every week. And this is a weekly 2.5, 3 hour time of engagement. And the services offered are all different. It depends on if a staff member flexes their hours or comes back to volunteer that evening. And we sometimes do have HIV testing. We do have condom demonstrations. We, all of these different things. We have clothes. Sometimes we used to have showers and laundry pre-COVID. But something that used to happen, which I think in this middle ground now, because during COVID, we didn't allow eating inside. So folks would have to leave to go eat and come back in. But pre-COVID, we would have different organizations come and cook and serve every week. So it's really who can sign up, which body is available to put food on a plate, or even just to supply the food and have another volunteer give food, because that was a big need we saw. And as you said, HIV testing is always awesome. If you have someone that can test and deal with the results on demand, awesome. So really, I think like whatever service you can do, just focusing on even that one service, if it is just a tent and a mobile charger and saying, this is our drop-in right now, that's pretty awesome. Especially, did you say you're Bucks County? Yeah, especially next to the woods in Bucks County. That's pretty impressive. So I think that's the funny thing about saying model, is because drop-ins can exist in any capacity. They can be on a sidewalk, for our case in Kensington. Yeah. Anyone have any thoughts or questions about that? We can move on to another topic too. So something we did chat a little bit about this was barriers, whether that's political buy-in or council member buy-in, neighbor buy-in, even depending where you are, Dr. Kroll, in Bucks County, thinking about whoever is nearby or whose woods these are. Or like Caroline mentioned, working with local emergency departments to get data. What types of barriers exist for you all in providing these services, even current for Susan? Yeah, I'd be eager to hear. or what potential barriers are there that funding as well.
I was gonna say funding is of course like always an issue. And I think there are opportunities and like ways to kind of get creative as always with funding, and just kind of how you sell what it is that you're doing. But just for an example, like we got VOCA funding recently, and once it kind of like started, the expectations of that funder were like very like client level data. Like essentially we had to like enroll everybody, and it was like very intense considering we're trying to be this low barrier, not really ask your name, be fine with a first name. And so that was like something that just proved to, you know, it was like great because it was a pretty significant like funding stream, and important, but like VOCA themselves didn't really get or historically fund drop-in centers, so it was like a stretch for them, and I'm not sure if it's like necessarily the best fit just because of the expectations of data that they want, and victimization. They want to know, because it's victims of crime, they want to know what the victimizations are. And again, like to sit there with folks at the drop-in level and be like, hey, were you ever, you know, we got creative. Sue was awesome, and just like creating like a survey and like having people come in and, you know, just making it more voluntary and blah, blah, blah. You know, we worked around it, but I would say it was certainly like that like mismatch of funder versus like the service, and funders don't always like get or maybe historically have funded drop-in centers.
I appreciate, Jen, what you were saying when you started even this conversation. I think one of the biggest areas is that there is not, from what we know, like drop-in specific funding. And, you know, we're kind of constantly trying to be like, well, we have case managers who could get funded by you know, Medicaid, but like what happens when they are just having like pizza in the walkway with someone and like talking about their experience at the emergency room that was horrible because they got thrown out, or, you know, like we want to count these really low barrier sessions and like the harm reduction work, right, of communicating with someone in their environment in a place that they feel safe, which might not always be behind an intake, you know, behind an intake chair. And so we've really had to get creative with like, okay, this case manager could get funded through this because they're doing this, and this, you know, frontline staff can get funded through this, and the manager can supervise this person in half, you know, so it's like so many like pieces that we pull together. And really honestly, like our drop-in, our budget, like for the amount of people that we serve annually, it's the like it respectively, it's like one of our smallest budgets, and we do, I mean, it's not the small, it's a small budget compared to the work that we do, and we really make a lot out of a little. And I think that that's something that I can't really speak to prevention, but from what I understand, it's like always fighting feeling understaffed, not even feeling it, the experience of it, like the ratio of staff to client is just, it's really, really difficult. And I think that is, it can lead to staff burnout, it can lead to staff stress. And I think that's a cycle when we know when folks are under, you know, when their hours are increased, or they, you know, feel pressured to, you know, it's hard to take the vacation if there's no staff calling out or whatever, or if there's too many staff. So I think that the funding / the need is so specific, and yeah, there's nothing quite catered towards it.
Yeah, I think funding is so frustrating, I think, for everybody. And it just seems like we should be able to make a change here. I mean, you know, part of the challenge is that when dollars come from the federal government, the people that appropriate those dollars determine that there are limitations on what we can spend them on, and there are burdensome reporting requirements that go associated with those dollars. And then so it sounds great that states are getting all this money to address the opioid crisis or substance use disorder. But when you really read the requirements associated with it, and that's just from the feds, then states have their own procurement policies and rules around how they have to put money out through grants. And it really is, it's amazing, honestly, that any dollars get to communities, period. Because there's just such a challenge in trying to navigate and balance, you know, how do we creatively get the money to this organization, but then that means this organization doesn't even get to use all those dollars because a portion of them is used for administrative reporting requirements that we're requiring in combination with receiving those dollars. It also requires organizations to sort of have a business plan, right? Like you have to propose to us what you're going to do with the money and how you're going to spend it. And for some organizations, that's really difficult. Like they have a 50,000 foot view of this is what we want to accomplish. But because they don't have the money and can't start hiring people, they don't actually know how that's going to play out, right? And they need the flexibility to say, well, you know, we intended to hire X number of case managers, but then we realized that's not really what we needed. We needed more peers, or, you know, we needed a medical professional. And so it's just this endless cycle of getting into people in communities need the money and they need the flexibility. But the state is saying, we can't give it to you without a formal plan. And by the way, then you have to report to us how you're spending it. And the feds are the ones giving us the dollars, but they come with all these strings attached. And so, you know, somehow I think to break the cycle, we have to get to a point where at the federal level, some of these dollars are coming to states or communities with less stipulations. And that's going to be really hard because people who are giving us these dollars are people that still have an awful lot of stigma about our disease. And they're still hearing from their constituents, like, well, you can't just, you know, give out money for people to do whatever they want with. But the reality is that's sort of what we need. I mean, we may get to a point where we've made great progress with the overdose epidemic. You know, maybe we'll really make tremendous headway, and then we can get to a place where they put more restrictions in place and ask for more accountability and more reporting. But right now, yes, it's great they're flooding the system with money, but they're also flooding it with burdensome requirements. And that's at every level, there's those requirements. And we take up so much time and effort at all of those levels, trying to think of innovative ways around the requirements. And instead, if we just lifted some of the requirements, we could get the money spent and show progress and justify why we don't need all of those requirements to begin with. But we can never get over that hump. And it's so very irritating.
Something that you made me think of in discussing all of that and fitting in these, like, well, Susan mentioned it too, kind of putting the puzzle together of what our funders want and then how we can manage to do it. The one thing that popped into my head was certified peer specialists and recovery specialists. And that might be our best bargaining tool. And I mean, what a great thing to employ folks with experience. So, I mean, of course, that means we'll need the funding to employ people. But I think that is an awesome tool to say, well, we have these folks who are trained, have the certification, probably, hopefully coming into the organization, especially if you're just starting out, and they know about this experience, you know, are living with HIV, could be in recovery themselves from mental illness, homelessness, family member, substance use, you know, whatever that might be. And then they're your person with, you know, you, Dr. Kroll, or whoever else is available on Wednesday at 5 at your tent by the woods. And then I think that's how it starts out. And it sounds like, Susan, that's kind of how you all started too. And I know that's how our drop-in similar started, with a Master's of Social Work intern who volunteered, had her internship, and then was the drop-in support staff and the only drop-in support staff. So I think having the one person and saying, well, they'll do case management, but really they're also going to do shirts and toothbrushes and make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. So you have to have that person who's on board to get peanut butter up to the elbow. That's a very common thing for us. But one other thing I thought of that we did with the city and Broad Street Ministries and a few other organizations, Project Home as well, there are two things. We did bathrooms about 2 years ago. We had a hepatitis A outbreak. So all of a sudden the city realized, oh, we need bathrooms, we need hand sanitizer and washing stations, and we don't have this. So then utilizing that terrible thing, but then having bathrooms and then coupling in a tent and saying, this is not what we did because we already had the drop-in center, but saying, well, we'll have a bathroom that is serviced Wednesday night from 5 to 8 or whatever, and we put our tent next to it, and we have a recovery specialist, and that's that. And the bathroom's open from those times. And I'm assuming there's not a hepatitis A outbreak in Bucks County. I haven't heard of anything happening, thank goodness. But you know, leveraging in those ways, because then that was a sanitation issue, and the Department of Public Health was really excited to get on with that. And it supplied a needed service. So I mean, that is a drop-in and of itself, is having a hand washing station or a bathroom. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what you touched on there with the peers is really important from a funding perspective. So one of the challenges with funding is not just like sort of a one-time grant, which is what a lot of we have access to right now, but really sustainability. And so, you know, our department's goal is to get these services reimbursed through regular funding mechanisms. So make them Medicaid eligible reimbursements, get them reimbursed through private insurance companies, because that's what's going to enable the services to continue, right? We can give you a little bit of money to get moving and off the ground, but that money is going to dry up, and there has to be that sustainability. And specifically related to peers, one of the challenges that we've had at the state level is actually coming from within the peer community. So as we started to try to fight for peer services generally to be a reimbursed service, so I'm talking either mental health or SUD peer broadly, there was this tension within that group to say, well, we don't want to be lumped in with the mental health peers. We are our own thing, and we want to be reimbursed separately for that. We don't want the same requirements associated with that. And so that's kind of one example of our own community of drug and alcohol, substance use disorder folks kind of preventing our own progress. You know, sometimes we almost trip on our own shoelaces, and we're shooting for the moon and not willing to settle for something that's close to the moon, but not quite there, knowing it might get us there eventually. So like reimbursement of peer services is one of those that I think if we could get over that hump and really kind of think about peer services more broadly, that will help in terms of funders viewing that service as an actual medically reimbursable service. Instead of us trying to say we're something special. We are special, but everybody's special, and the long-term goal is the sustainability of those services. So there still has to be a lot of conversation with our field and with people in recovery in general to talk about like, what is the end goal here? Like where do we want to get with all of these things? And how do we frame that, communicate that, message that in a way that's going to help us accomplish that goal, even if it means lumping ourselves into other vulnerable populations? And that's a really, really difficult discussion to have, because you don't want to marginalize what we do and the people that we support. They are important. They deserve to be spotlighted. They deserve to have these services. But if we need to talk about them in a larger picture, in a more broad way, in order to advance that goal, then maybe it's worth doing that. So those are some of the really, really tricky conversations that I think really need to happen over the next couple of years if we want to make true progress in creating pathways for sustainability of these services.
Thanks so much, Jen. That's really helpful. And I know, Susan, you also mentioned utilizing Medicaid and getting reimbursed. I love that idea. Caroline, please go ahead.
This is more of just a quick comment, but going back to what you said about the city wanting to address like sanitation as well as And I mean, and then you add in your tent right next to it. It kind of just reminded me of like a safe injection site. Like it's not only that you go there to safely use under supervision, but you get other services while you're there. Bathroom, like you could get but then again, it's just that's more of a like a political thing. But getting that was just something that came to my mind when you said that.
No, I mean, I totally see your train of thought there. I think it's like providing, like, whether it's under an umbrella, a tent, or in a building, or in a basement, or in an office, a physician's office or a provider's office, every Wednesday, 3 to 5, that's only the time folks with substance use, or as we're saying, perhaps like mental health and substance use disorder, to get that reimbursement angle. We're saying, you know, we're here for this. You can come in and just sit down and put your feet up, because you probably haven't done that. But also, we're not going to bug you. But here's, you know, the pamphlets, or the people are available for HIV testing, getting your drug and alcohol assessment to get treatment, just having a sandwich, getting hot coffee, getting some change of clothes. I know, Susan, I think you all have ability to wash up and have folks have shower ability, right? Which I always send people to you all for.
Yeah, we do showers. Yeah, we weren't doing showers during like the height of COVID, but more recently started them back up.
Yeah,
but yeah, there does have to be like a shift in just like valuing the rest, right? Like valuing the rest, valuing that that like these folks are deserving of a place to sit down and a cup of coffee and having a casual conversation with someone, right? Like, and in some level, because the coffee does have to come, like, you know, someone has to make the PB&J, you know, and as wonderful as like all the volunteers are, like, you know how it is, Rebecca, like a volunteer volunteered to do, you know, ladies' night food, and all of a sudden something happened and they had a family, you know what I mean? Like, it's really hard. And then you don't have someone, and it, like, as essential as volunteers are, it's not sustainable, to Jen's point, you know, and but all of that to say, it's yeah, valuing that rest and that space because they deserve it, you know.
That brings up a great point too, and I think Caroline kind of touched on this in when you're providing a service, are you providing just that service? And obviously that saying fund our drop-in, or come work in our drop-in, where you might do nothing, and, you know, or volunteer where you might really do nothing, you might just stand there, but that there's so much value to whoever is doing that and the funds for that. But I think that does take kind of a mind shift of, you know, funding aside, resources aside, just like you said, Susan, saying, oh, we don't have to push anyone into XYZ service or XYZ realm, or, you know, maybe today we're not going to get anything accomplished, but we're going to sit. And that's what we're providing today. And yeah, I think, I mean, I know that's it. I think it is a mind shift. I think it's hard to get away, especially working in this service and this caring industry, thinking, oh, but we want to fix things. And I want to help you get to next step of whatever that means. But yeah, we do essentially just provide that seat. So I think that's another thing, is just like seats under a tent is my favorite way to go, just in creating a small pop-up area. But yeah.
And if I can jump in, sorry, I don't have the raise hand function as a.
Oh, we don't need it. No problem.
I think there's so much evidence that people who go to these kinds of places, whether that's a supervised consumption site or a drop-in center or whatever, do have higher rates of moving into treatment and moving into recovery than do people who aren't offered these services. So, you know, when you're trying to convince people of the value of this, it's not just that, you know, everybody deserves a coffee, right? And that's a thing. But that, yes, we do, in fact, you know, improve people's lives. And that might just be giving them a coffee, but it might be getting them into treatment, and it might be sort of meeting them where they are in terms of recovery on their own terms, or the way in which they use drugs on their own terms, but that's less sort of chaotic, you know, and more manageable for them. So I think that's a great way of putting it. But for people who I think have been, like you said, in this world for a long time, treatment is the focus. And taking a step back and just meeting people where they are, I think, is that mind shift that we need.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think of like the concept of a holding environment, and this is my like social work therapist kind of coming out, but what we talk about in creating this holding environment, and like it's really the process that is healing and not like these like outcomes. And that's what's really interesting, going back to the funding, is like outcomes, when it really is the process that provides that healing. It really is in the space that you hold the drop, like, and I'm just so smiling because that's like what our drop-in center is. I mean, folks come in after, and like trigger warning, just establish it, like after being raped, or after a John beat them up, a sex buyer beat them up, or in some really, really vulnerable places. And not having an agenda is the most beautiful thing you can provide to someone in a place where they are coming to such vulnerability, because the overwhelming amount of shame, guilt, pressure that society already puts on them for using, for being in sex work, or for their own vulnerabilities that we condemn as a society, and then add on top of that all the racial disparities, what white supremacy does to Black and brown folks in these communities. I mean, it's overwhelming to so many of the folks that we serve, and just to sit in that space with them and hold that over, like, that's healing, and therapy isn't accessible to so many of our folks because they don't have a place to live, they don't have a cell phone, they don't, so many of them don't have access to some of the healing spaces that really all of us should have access to. And so I think that's something that I come back to, that a drop-in really is like a really low barrier holding space for folks, where like options can be presented to them, and it is all in there. They have the autonomy to choose that.
Thanks. That's really, I find it really powerful. It is really moving. And I understand the power and smiling and joy behind that, because it is just an honor to just hold that space. It's an awesome thing that we can do. I wanted to see if anyone has any questions, or we still have some time, but if anyone has specific questions or specific thoughts, or even broad questions and thoughts, or if it's a little bit unrelated to drop-in, or just harm reduction type things, happy to open the floor for discussion on that.
I have a question. Susan, you were mentioning that the budget for these activities is one of the smallest across your organization. Are you able to give me some perspective on what that budget is? It's okay, you don't need like an exact number. I promise I won't quote you.
No, you're fine. You're fine. It's not large nonprofit, like it's really okay. And we wanted to have this space to be a place where we could transparently share that. Some of you folks are considering what you could get bang for your buck type of thing. But so our budget is split between drop-in services, which is around $200,000 a year. And I can kind of share with you what we get from that $200K. And then case management services, which is a little under $200K. So it's like maybe $180. We have 3 case managers full-time. Our caseload is a bit lower because of the population that we serve. We have found that, it is wiser to be able to meet intensely with with a person versus large capacity meeting infrequently. So our capacity per case manager is around 15 to 20. So 3 case managers, and then our milieu staff, which is what we just call folks who are in the drop-in center. Those are peer, like it is peer-led as well, but we have 1 full-time milieu and 1 part-time milieu, and then a manager. And so the funding covers, we do 3 drop-in days, 1 drop-in night, So Monday through Wednesday, drop-in days. Thursday nights is a drop-in night. We do showers at all of those times, food at all of those times, clothing at all of those times. Case management is available at all of those times. We pre-COVID, like TV, couch, people could take naps, hair dryer, you know, the whole nine, straightener, whatever. We historically have done frozen meals that folks could come in and eat when they want, because we found that meal times for us weren't as helpful to folks in their schedules, because like someone would come in at 3 p.m. and be like, oh, I missed food, or, you know, so we opted for like more available options, but like not home cooked. And also we were running into the volunteer issue, you know, with the cooking. And so we do frozen meals that are offered all day that someone could come in whenever they want and heat them up. So obviously pros and cons to it all, but it's what worked for us. And tons of snacks. We always have snacks just available for folks. They love all the fruit roll-ups. So yeah, yes, exactly. And coffee all day. And we try to keep our ice machine running in the summer because they love all the ice. We should like just get an ice machine is something that I think would be amazing. So our laundry it's a small drop-in center. It's like less than 2,000 square feet. We, at like some of our peaks, we're serving over 100 individuals a day. So our nights would be about 40 to 50 because it was shortened. And then our days were 100. And that's like 100 people within like 6 or 7 hours. We, on Thursdays during the day, would have groups. So we would have really, really low barrier groups. We would do like a spiritual freedom group. We would do a safety group. We would do it's under the sanctuary model, a trauma-informed model. It's called SELF. It stands for safety, emotions, loss, and future. It's a really low barrier way for folks to engage with parts of their life without necessarily opening up their trauma, but still like taking control of areas of their life that they feel comfortable with. A lot of time like interns would run those, and that was really a great use of intern time. And then we do like an art group. And so sometimes we would do like, for a while we were like making candles, and they would like take candles, and some folks like lived in houses that were abandos and didn't have, you know, so it was like, actually it served like two purposes. Yeah, it was useful. Sometimes we would make like little pillows or blankets, you know, where they would like tie up the felt or whatever. And so just like things that were practical and things that weren't, like things that were just therapeutic. And usually we have like a DJ, and we like pass around the iPhone, and like each person picks a song that they really like, and everyone's like jamming to different songs. It's really beautiful. So those are every Thursday. And then Fridays we have a low barrier medical service, Courage Medicine. I know they come to Prevention Point as well. They do Suboxone, just general medical attention, you know, support with wound care. Yes, exactly. Love Courage. And then they also have a psychiatrist and psychologist on their team. So they can support with really a lot of folks' needs, and they are really busy. Like, honestly, they're just all day Friday, and folks really utilize them. And then we also have a legal clinic that comes, that pre-COVID were coming like once a week or every other week. And they specifically are like surrounding gender-based violence and commercial sexual exploitation. So folks who might have crimes related to a prostitution charge or trafficking, they would support those individuals in vacature and like getting them off their record and expungement. And also just like supporting people with the random legal issues that they would have. Like, it was great because we're not lawyers, and if someone would come in and have a custody question or something about their case or whatever, we would refer them to the lawyers, and it was a really helpful service. So that's, I mean, I feel like that's a lot for the budget. I like think of what we do, and I'm like, it's just so much.
That is a lot. Thank you for being so detailed. That's really helpful.
Sure.
Well, everything you brought up makes me think of coalition building, because I feel like that's 75% of what it has to be because of funding, because I'm not a lawyer either. So I'm not there to provide that service, nor am I a psychologist. So I'm not going to provide that. And I'm also not a certified tester, you know, like all of these different things. I can paint nails. I can absolutely do that, but that's kind of where it ends. So I think in thinking of this, and even thinking, I keep using you, Dr. Kroll, and like this tent idea next to the woods. But even thinking of any type of pop-up in a room, in an office for a few hours, having a team that is, a lot of churches come to Kensington to serve food, and we have folks now, I primarily do weekends, and we have folks who come every Saturday and bring as many bagged lunches as we want. And that is just incredible because we have meals up the street. We have a meal site on every day and every day but Sunday. And so, but like you said, Susan, people, like, I don't eat to a schedule anymore, especially during COVID at home. I'm either constantly eating or not eating at all. So expecting folks to go to the meal site between 12 and 3, and that's the one time they can have food, that's awesome. But we need bag sandwiches, which have like a Coke in them and gummy bears and awesome things that we can't buy, but folks really want to donate and serve and create these bags, and they can do it at home safely. They don't have to go to church. They don't have to come on site, So creating those types of little coalitions too, I think is just so, so crucial. Whatever people offer is often accepted. So yeah, I really appreciate all of that information and detail and going into so many different ways with that.
I had a question. Susan, do you, can people stay as long as they want in the drop-in center, or do you limit how much time a person can be in?
We never jumped on board with the time limit because we wanted folks to kind of regulate that themselves. And so we opt for transparency of max capacity and letting the individuals decide. And so we would say like, hey, there's a line outside. We're at capacity, especially now in COVID. I think pre-COVID, we would have capacity issues as well because it's a small space. And so we would just say like, hey guys, we are at capacity. There's a line of folks. Some might not have gotten food or clothes or, does anyone have a place to go? Or, and usually 2 or 3 people would hop up and be like, I have to go anyway. Or, you know what, I'm good. They can hop in. And so that's been our trajectory. I know now we do have a little bit more of a structure because of COVID, and just our requirements were increased and we had way less opportunity. So people did have to kind of come through the center and go through their stations, a little bit at a quicker pace than we would. We didn't even have our couch. I don't think we have our couch now still. So we have shifted, but we want to get back to that place eventually where our couch is back, people can relax and sleep. And yeah, I don't know if Heather, you wanted to even add to that too.
No, I think you covered it pretty well. Yeah, like I said, it's been like a little bit more bare bones post-COVID, as most people are, but we hope to get there again soon.
I know for us at Prevention Point, we also do not, there are a few circumstances in which we have folks come in and check the time and send them back out, because it just feels so terrible to do. And I think, I know, when you're creating a comfortable space for staff as well, you don't want to make your staff members feel uncomfortable and say, well, you have to kick 5 people out every hour, So that really didn't fly, and nobody bought into. We have open discussions about that. But I will say pre-COVID, we have probably a little bit of a bigger space than you all. Okay, I actually haven't been to your site, so I really don't know. But we would just pack people in. People would just, it was like a can of sardines in there. Just so many people standing, sitting, our seats were right next to each other. Then in COVID, we decreased dramatically to, I think, like 20 people total in these 2 rooms, which previously we probably had 150. So not all the time, but during lunch or something, it would be packed. Yeah. So I think though some things that have made us need to kind of monitor is on our overnights during really, really cold evenings in the winter. We do kind of the same thing. Hey, there's a line outside. If you go out to take a smoke break, or if you need to go do anything, your spot is probably going to be gone because it's way too cold outside, it's raining, it's whatever. And even now with our 20-ish person limit, or max rather, if folks leave for too long, I know when I'm there, we move belongings. If somebody left belongings at a seat, we move them to behind our desk for as long as we can, probably the rest of the day, if not 2 or 3 days. And then they can come back and get those things if we knew who it was, or if somebody's asking about it. But it's just so hard, and we want everyone to have a few minutes off their feet and watching a movie, whatever. But it's a hard decision to make in a small space.
Yeah, I think if you can, I think some of the questions we ask is does this rule benefit their safety, right? Does this rule safety and autonomy, and right, we have the things that kind of are our foundation: trauma informed, building autonomy, safety, and does this rule enhance that, or is it staff centered, right? We talk about our rules staff centered, or our rules client centered. Is this because I want my job to be easier, or is this really for the clients? And I think that that's a really because there's 1,000 questions that you could ask about your specific drop-in center about how you want to operate it. And I think that whatever lens you're kind of operating from, those questions can be helpful too. I mean, I know it's obvious, but.
And I think thinking of that staff-centered and client-centered, I think that's something we could talk about. We don't have to, but I think thinking of, well, how do we make both work? Well, always kind of knowing that we are participant driven. Well, and deciding what the mission is too, because it also doesn't have to be participant driven or client driven. It can be a respite for X amount of time with X rules, and that's fine too. I think that's the point of discussing creating a drop-in, is that it is what it is, and it can evolve, it can be refined, which we all saw during COVID, but existing is kind of the number one thing that is beneficial. But having these guidelines, like Susan just mentioned, of saying, is it staff-centered or participant-centered, and what are we trying to serve here? I think those types of questions are really supportive in creating a safe, well-being centered atmosphere for staff and participants, which is obviously very crucial in these spaces where problems may arise at any given time for any given reason. It might just be really hot that day, or people have not slept or eaten. I think those are the primary problem causers. So yeah, if anyone has questions about that, or has experiences about supporting staff and participants alike, happy to hear about that as well. Or if that's not interesting, we can move on.
I'll share. I think one of the challenges that I've been having lately in supporting our advocates, which is what we call our case managers, is wanting there to be space to meet clients where they're at and to be able to support them as much as they need, while not without sacrificing the time and attention that the other clients deserve to have as well. And walking the line between showing up for someone in every way that they are looking for, and also having boundaries that, one, protect the sanity and well-being of the staff member, two, protect the time and needs of the other clients, and three, also support this client or clients who meet that description in developing some of those skills for themselves in the long term. This is obviously, I'm not talking about one moment of crisis, but for a client who feels like every day, all day is a moment of crisis, and how can I handle that? I think that's one of the things that I've been thinking about as a supervisor for our staff with our clients, and I would love to hear how other folks handle that dynamic, if that's something that you come up against.
I'm happy to share, but I also want to allow space for others. But I think it's such a fine line of how we create these spaces, continue holding these spaces, and that means like physical or just an emotional space or an advocate space, or doing our jobs while also maintaining our ability to stay mentally healthy, whatever that means, just maintaining our well-being for the day or for the moment, and serving folks who may be in constant crisis due to whatever, like as I said previously, the heat, food, chaotic use at the time, experiencing a pregnancy, whatever, anything could be part of this. I know for us, we have a lot of conversations with folks, and I think are very open and honest with our participants in having these conversations of, we're noticing XYZ. It seems like this has been going on almost daily or multiple times a day for some time. What are your thoughts, to the participant? And what are your thoughts that are pushing? What do you think could be, creating this cycle for you? Are you noticing this cycle too? And I think just having that open dialogue and the whole, lots of open-ended questions and creating space to think about what might be going on. This is obviously an optimistic outlook, but I do think that can definitely create better relationships between staff and clients, participants, and also create more of a healing mentality for staff separately as well as participants, in knowing that, oh, we're both human and I am carrying a burden of what's going on for you, whether I want to or not. We might be going to our own therapists, talking about that burden we're holding on to, which is a whole other topic that we could get into for a few hours, of having low barrier access to therapy and counseling for folks in these fields. But, just acknowledging these spaces and acknowledging our humanities. I know it's so simple and a little naive, but I do think that's crucial in that.
Yeah, I think, Jessica, if you're feeling the tension between like boundaries for clients and like advocating for them, boundaries for staff and advocating, like I think that's a really healthy place to be, right? Like, because it's always that dance. It's always that dance of, it's 7:30. Do I answer this phone call? It's, it's always that dance. And I think it's when we lose, like I think Heather has said to me, it's like when we lose that tension, when it's like an easy answer, when it's like, oh, of course I answer the phone, or no, I would never answer the phone, right? Like when we lose the reality of that tension in our humanness and our limits, like that's actually where the dance kind of becomes something else. If I know I'm using weird amount of metaphors right now, but
I also think, I don't know what would be possible for your staff members, but I think supporting folks in, like I know Health Federation has a lot of vicarious trauma, self-care workshops for free all the time. If you are not hooked up to those resources, we can be in touch and get your folks into that. But obviously the ideal would be like a paid day or a paid few hours to do that training. And I see Heather nodding. I deeply believe in paying folks for these things, which again, who's funding? What situation can we do that? But I think allowing people the ability to grow and to support them in that growth and to support them in having that space of saying, oh, wow, this is heavy work and this person's constantly in crisis and therefore I'm constantly in crisis and I'm not serving them. And, having that ability to reflect with a social worker or whoever at Health Fed who is able to facilitate that discussion and thought process. I think that is also a great route. It's not going to solve the problem outright, but I think supporting folks in trainings is one of my favorite things.
Yeah, and I think just a part of our culture is like self-care days. So like one, giving staff the ability to call out when they need to. Obviously within reason, we also struggle on the other end of that sometimes, but to take a self-care day. And also as a team, we try to do quarterly, bi-yearly like self-care days where the whole team kind of gets together and does something fun together. So I think just really incorporating that. And I also just really think about like parallel process, which is kind of like how I treat and support my staff is how then they will treat and support the clients. And that, so it's, again, it's not like that either or, but it's like, how do I support and give staff that self-care, that autonomy, that respect, and that like trust, because then they will then treat the clients that way. So kind of creating this like positive cycle. And I think that is keeping on top of trauma, keeping on top of vicarious trauma, like processing things together. If there is a critical incident, if there's a loss, pausing and getting together and processing together. Just all those kind of like quote tools in the tool bag to kind of help navigate this really, really, really hard work.
We're almost out of time, and I feel like that's a great ending point. Heather, I think you really kind of brought things together in a great way there. Does anyone have any questions or closing thoughts as we're finishing up here? Well, I appreciate you all so much for joining this session. I learned so much, and this was so productive. And now when I just tell people to go to you all, Susan and Heather, I know a little bit more about what I'm referring to, but I am often told how great it is. So that's why we constantly push people your way. I'm going to throw my email in the chat if anyone wants to be connected to anyone else or is looking for some resources or just learning about other things we're doing at Prevention Point or, whatever, happy to connect. Yeah, let me just throw that in, and then I hope you all have a great rest of your Friday and a great weekend. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, everybody. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks all.